Hello and welcome to this edition of Dr. Clark's 101, the Living Classroom. Today we're talking politics 101. My good friend and university professor at Southern University in Baton Rouge, Dr. Eugene Bernard Lee Johnson. And Dr. Johnson, greetings and welcome, my friend. How you been?
I've been great, Dr. Clark. How you doing?
Oh, yeah, yes, indeed. You've been on the program a number of times, and, you're absolutely fantastic guest. And I always like your analysis. And I like your analysis, your approach toward understanding politics. And we want to talk some good federal, state, and local politics today. And among the things I want to talk about in particular is that on the federal level, let's talk about the nature of this administration, the federal administration. Let's talk about the Trump administration. I'm just wondering if you can give us some conceptualizations of terms of how you view this administration and in two dimensions. It's foreign policy and also domestically. But in particular, let's talk about the handling of the Iranian conflict, the U.S.-Iranian conflict, and how you see it. And when you talk to your students and your co-workers and friends out there, and when you make your own personal analysis, how do you see the U.S.-Iran conflict at this point? Yes, sir.
So, first of all, thanks for having me, as always. When we're looking at the Trump administration and we're thinking about foreign policy, the first thing that we're thinking about as we get into this understanding of the U.S. involvement in Iran right now is we're thinking about their connection to Israel. And so one of the things that we're looking at is this isn't a proxy conflict. The U.S. is a direct belligerent in this affair. The U.S. and Israel initiated attack in February. And so when you're thinking about that, they launched, I believe, nearly 900 missiles in about a 12-hour span. And so they were the direct aggressors in this affair. And so what happens is when you are a direct aggressor, someone is expected to respond. And so what happens is that wave killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And so what we have here is there was then a memorandum of understanding that was agreed upon, and then the rules were changed a little bit. And so they've been in that state. But the way that we have to think about this, it does have a brief connection to domestic politics, because one of the things, and we're thinking about America, is most of the time when it comes to war, bipartisan military spending bills are something that normally clears easily. Both parties are saying, hey, we need to protect the country. We want a strong military. But recently, Senate Democrats denied $1.15 billion in military spending. And so what we're now seeing here is, number one, we have Senate Democrats responding to the Trump regime's idea of like, this is how we want to protect the country with military spending. But also we're now seeing them intruding in the idea that Israel and America have to be intertwined, because there's also the idea floating that the Israeli and American militaries have to now join. And so we have domestic conflicts and we have foreign conflicts often now intertwining. If you go back to the elections from a couple of years ago with Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, one of the main things was the war in Gaza. And when you think about the war in Gaza, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, one of the things was with the undecided voters was, hey, we need to make sure that we do not have this relationship with Israel.
Yes. Now, I like the connection that you bring in. I like the fact that inherent in your analysis, the fact that we bring in the nature is the inherent in your analysis, the fact that we bring in Israel at the core. But is this not a war of choice? Yes, for this president, President Trump, and as being a war of choice, if you can talk to us about the party politics with connection to this war of choice. Yeah, and when I say party politics, how does the Democrats and Republicans play into this? Because it's essential for our listeners to understand.
So one of the things that we have to think about, and we can go back, I'll say, I'm 35. So we can go back about 45 to 50 years in thinking about party politics and war in this context. Normally in this country, going all the way back to the Cold War, so that's a little bit more than 50 years, when there is a war that wants to be fought by either party that's in leadership, there hasn't been pushback. Now, when the pushback comes, it is not because of the party that is going into war. It is because of the outcomes of loss of life. Now, here, there has been loss of life, but not as much as previous military conflicts, right? And so what we now have, though, is Trump's domestic politics are influencing how Democrats respond to everything else.
And when you say domestic politics, we're talking about quality of life issues.
Yes.
Beginning, number one, price
Mm-hmm.
of prices, affordability, and gas.
Yes.
Yeah, which
And
is
so
at the base. Yes, sir.
I'm glad that you mentioned
All
gas. When you mentioned price of petroleum, when you think about the Strait of Hormuz, right? And the opening and closing of that, and that goes into that agreement with Iran. And so when you're thinking about that, and I can use myself as an example here, my family and I went on vacation 2 weeks ago. When I left Louisiana, I filled up my Jeep. I paid $346. I got to Buc-ee's, which quick note, I think Buc-ee's is overrated. I got to Buc-ee's. I paid $246. I got to Florida. I paid $4.96 for gas. And so it's one of these things where gas is something that, number one, isn't static across the country. But number two, it is something that impacts us daily. And a lot of us are being impacted by it because when you drive to work, even if it's just city mileage, it's something that's going to add up if you are spending an extra $2. It makes you spend it quickly. So now you're thinking about gas, you're thinking about the price of food going up, but also we're now thinking about certain foods that you can't buy because of Robert Kennedy being in charge of, excuse me, I'm having a brain fart. Robert Kennedy being in charge of the CDC. And so now you're thinking about we can't eat certain fresh produce. And so you have these certain things going on where our quality of life is being impacted on every single level. I never thought there would be a day where it's more healthy for me to eat Popeyes than spinach.
and that day is here. But you know what? But there is something that I want you to address because you started off with Israel, and I want you to address this before we move forward.
Mhm.
And that is the nature of America's support of Israel and this war.
Yeah.
And because there is indeed a connection there that's inherent for all of us to understand. And the connection that this president has used to involve himself in the war, but yet the nature of the relationship with Israel now is almost being diffused and it's inverted.
Mhm.
There was a time when when the Republican Party was 100% Israel,
Yeah.
and the Democratic Party itself was 100% Israel, and now we discovered that the Democrats are waning in their support
Mhm.
for not necessarily Israel, but we're speaking of the government of Israel.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I don't want to go as far as say the Democratic Party is waning in their
Okay,
support
all right.
yet, right? Because we did see in
A fraction of the party.
a fraction of the party. We did see in elections late last year that AIPAC funded Democratic candidates were winning elections against non-AIPAC funded Democratic candidates. And so it's important to see that Israel was still able to impact the Democratic Party, and the candidates that were supported by and supported Israel were the ones that were winning. However, you are seeing a strong, very progressive contingent of Democrats who are now being more outspoken and saying our connection, not just the party's connection, but our country's connection with Israel is impacting not only our party politics, but the daily lives of our American people. And so I think that's where we are. So I don't want to go as far as say the full party, but there is a good faction of the party that is now speaking
absolutely
that.
correct. And what I have discovered is that there's an interesting dichotomy which is taking place. Over the years, I've sent a number of people to Israel
Mhm.
through AIPAC,
Yeah.
and I say people, a number of students. Now, what I've discovered though is that now we see that many of this generation of students are firmly are supporting to a large extent the Palestinians
Hmm.
and the people of color, and they're not that as strongly in support of Israel and what AIPAC is doing.
Hmm.
And so, as a result of that, we find that many of the older politicals and older polls, they're wondering why is this, why is that, and can you explain some of that? Yes.
So
Because you have a direct connection with young people and young students as well. Yes, sir.
So I think we actually have a very close comparison here, and this might be something that is closer to that you can more closely understand because it will put you back into a space where you were my age with students. This is basically their South African apartheid. And so when you're thinking about this, right? First of all, these students were raised in the generation where Black Lives Matter has been on their scene, on their TVs all day, every day. So they have been raised in a space where their social media, their TV has already kind of sort of radicalized them, even if they haven't been paying attention. And so that's very important because framing in political communication is how these people get information. But number two, we're now having this understanding that if I'm seeing on social media live videos of bombs being dropped and I'm seeing little kids having their arms blown off, it's going to impact people in certain ways. And so a lot of people would joke about how sensitive this generation is, this Gen Z, but that sensitivity is also playing into them being a more caring population, which also means that they care about people more. But the thing is, we got to think about this. Going back to the civil rights movement in the 1960s, after the 7-Day War in 1967, Kwame Ture and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Coalition, they put out a note saying that the war against white supremacy is a intercommunal war. The same people that are oppressing black people in America are the same people that are oppressing Palestinian people worldwide. And a lot of people have now taken that understanding and they've brought it to present day. And so people are now seeing that when we see Black Lives Matter protests in Baton Rouge after Alton Sterling, in Minnesota after Philando Castile, in Minnesota after George Floyd, in Atlanta, in Baltimore after Freddie Gray, and when we see drones in America that are funded by Israel, we now have this understanding that all of these people are the same. I mentioned earlier that they're talking about combining the Israeli and American militaries. But what people don't know is that drones for police departments in America have been provided by Israeli military contractors for almost a decade now. And so a lot of times we think that these things are disconnected, but they're not. And so students who have more access to information, but they've also been framed and they've been socialized to care a little bit more and be more knowledgeable just of social justice because of the framing on their phones in their hands every single day. They're saying, I do not agree with these things. And so now they have the ability to just go on their phones and say it, but they also have the ability to see the atrocities right in front of their faces.
Good and good analysis. And let's do this. Let me turn the conversation again. And I want to talk about something while I have you here in the studio, which is very, very important. That is the nature of these congressional maps.
Mhm.
And I'd like to get your thoughts on the congressional maps. And I know you've been a big time observant of it and seeing what the maps are doing and seeing how we've gone from having two majority black districts in the state of Louisiana to one. And if you can just conceptualize for us your viewpoint in terms of how and why this is manifested in the way it has.
So I think the best way to think about this is it's not over, right? So of course we're going to be, excuse me, of course we are going to, like we know Landry suspended the May 16th election. We know when people go to qualify for fall races, I think that's August 5th through 7th when qualifications happen. The people who were qualified in February are going to have to re-qualify, right? And we know all those votes got thrown out after that May 16th election were suspended. We know that happened. We also have to see if Troy Carter and Cleo Fields will have to decide basically if they're going to fight for that same one-person district, that 5-1 district, because we had that 4-2. But the thing is, we know that there's still litigation out there. There's still court cases right now for the same plaintiffs that are saying that this is still racially based redistricting. And so we're not going to really know the outcome of those court cases probably for another 2 years or so. And so for the meantime, we're going to be operating again on a 5-1 map. But I'm hopeful, I'll say that, I'm hopeful that one day we will once again have 4-2. But the thing is, and this is where I think we need to kind of focus our fights for the next couple of years, but also kind of shape the conversation because I think that is important. When the conversation was going on 2 months ago now, One of the things that we kept having Democrats talk about during the hearings was opportunity districts, right? We can have three opportunity districts where it's not super majority Democrat, it's not super majority Republican, but there's a possibility that a black person can win, right? And so I think because of that framing, you have the ability to reshape that 4-2-5-1 conversation. Because often when you're thinking about what a majority district represents, 51-49 isn't an actual majority in politics. You actually are looking for about a 62 to 63% to represent that majority, because you have to account for people that aren't going to vote. And so when you're thinking about that, if I just say I got 51-49 in a classroom, and I know I have 12 students, but 5 of them not going to show up, I really got 7 students participating, right? And so that 51% really doesn't count. I got to have it to be 62 to 63% to actually make sure.
It becomes where you need a super majority of individuals of voting age population.
Exactly. And so that's where that framing of opportunity districts is very important, but also the turning down of that language is important as they fight those court cases in the future.
And part and parcel to the dilemma with opportunity districts, as I see it, is the fact that we know that in the South in general, and Louisiana in particular, race is destination, and we know that when individuals vote, race is highly important.
Yeah.
It's rare that you see. When I say rare, you don't see a high percentages of whites voting for blacks, given an opportunity. They don't. They just don't. And VOK said it best years ago, and that's just the way it works. Race is the predominant factor in all the politics in the South. Yes.
So, like a state like Louisiana is the perfect example of white people not voting for black people, regardless of party. So there hasn't even been black Republicans. But like a state like Florida, you can point to like a Byron Daniels, like a black Republican is one. In Louisiana, you can't do that. And so Louisiana, we have the perfect case to show that race and party affiliation does have a perfect relationship. And so when you say that we do need this majority to represent in that district, it makes sense, because even Republican black people cannot win in this state.
And do not.
And they do not.
It's plain and simple. And and let's talk some state and local politics as well in the remaining minutes that we do have. And you said we mentioned the fact that that Cleo Fields and Joy Carter, that they've said they would not run against one another. But there is something which I think is unusual, which is taking place. We find now, we just had the death of Senator Larry Selden, the senator who did replace Senator Cleo Fields, the state senator that replaced Cleo Fields when he went on to Congress. What happens at this point is that there's a lot of talk that Congressman Fields is going to go back to his old seat, and if he goes back to his old seat, then and take that seat back, because the argument is given that he can best work with the president of the Senate, Henry. And so what happens here is that. What do you make of that sort of politics, or the politics that's taking place in Baton Rouge in that particular seat?
I think
Yes, sir.
I think Cleo Fields has some other opportunities that he could take. I do think he could always come back to that Senate District 14
You
seat.
saying can or should?
I think he can come back. I don't necessarily think he should come
Okay,
back.
all right.
But I think he can come back and take that Senate 14 district seat. But I do think, and I've heard rumblings of him having other opportunities. However, I do think, and this is a larger conversation that we can't fully get into today. There has been a talk in Louisiana, especially in Baton Rouge politics, for years about there being a need for younger black candidates. And Larry Selders was one of those younger black people that stepped into office. He died at 44 years old. And one of the things that I think is important at this time is that the Senator Barrows and the Sharon Weston Brooms of the world, they step in and they find somebody else that's young that they can support and put in that place. I think Cleo Fields could always come back and do a great job in that role. Cleo Fields is a legend. Like based on when he got into the Senate, being at Southern University Law Center at such a young age and everything, he is a legend in Louisiana politics, right? Even from his representing and introducing Barack Obama in 2006 when he comes to Louisiana. Cleo Fields is a legend. However, this talk about young black people getting into politics in Baton Rouge is a continued talking point. And people keep coming to me and asking me, who are the young people that we can search out to get in these positions? Because a lot of these people are about to be term limited. And I think this is one of those times where when there's a special election that's probably going to come up, some of these people need to try to put their arms out to somebody and give them that opportunity.
Yeah, and let's talk some more local politics. Even right here, there's a big divide between the governor and the mayor of Baton Rouge. And just because, the mayor of New Orleans, and not just the mayor and the city council here. And so this divide that's taking place, I want you to talk about the necessity of the nature of this argument, and we can frame it for our listening audience.
Oh, so you're talking about the indictment of Liz Merrill?
Yes.
All right.
Yes,
so
we say governor, but that is, and I'm going to just say it, the executive branch.
Yes. So this is what happened, right? So the Orleans Parish grand jury handed out a 16-count indictment on, I believe, July 2nd, charging Liz Merrill with malfeasance in office and public intimidation, and that was tied to the letter she sent New Orleans officials in May, warning that their jobs were at risk if they opposed the law consolidating the city's criminal and district clerks of court. Now, if y'all remember, this was about the parish criminal district clerk position that Calvin Duncan had just been elected to. And so the recipients of those letters were Jason Williams and 5 council members, and the bond was set at $400,000. So what happened? It stalled because the Louisiana Supreme Court stayed the whole thing the next morning. And so what we have here is basically every criminal court judge in in Orleans Parish has since recused, and a retired judge was appointed on July 9th to take over. And Governor Jeff Landry has promised that he would pardon her as fast as the law allows and ordered state police to investigate the grand jury itself. Liz Merrill calls it retaliatory, meritless, and unconstitutional. She called it a political witch hunt. Now, this is important for a number of reasons, right? Why is Jeff Landry saying he will pardon Liz Merrill as soon as possible if she is taken down? Because these two are as thick as thieves, work as hand in hand, and it may signal that someone else is doing some things that might be unconstitutional or illegal. And so as we are talking about these things, the through line in this state versus New Orleans preemption is we're tracking the Republican state government versus Black Democrat municipal power. And so now that is escalating to criminal court on both sides. Now, why is this important for the constituents of these districts? They are basically creating an opportunity for all of your Black leaders to be removed from office so that they can then reshape those positions. But this connects back to the Louisiana versus Calais decision. Remember, so a lot of people were thinking this just impacts the Senate seats, the congressional districts, those 6 congressional districts. But Louisiana versus Calais also impacts the districts that are local. And that's what a lot of people aren't thinking about.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad that you highlighted that. Continue.
Yes, a lot of people aren't thinking about those local districts being impacted. And so if we have the state attorney general trying to remove people from office in Orleans Parish, and they also have the ability to reshape what localized districts look like. And if y'all are understanding Louisiana history, New Orleans has always been a battleground for Louisiana politics, where this is where power plays, even though it is not the capital. You can then reshape Orleans Parish to be a place that you want it to be.
And which is what's taking place right now. So
Which is what is taking place
it's a
right now.
natural. Let me put it this way: it has been an historical conflict, and now is a natural conflict, and we must understand the nature of this conflict. That the way it's playing out is very tough for people of color and municipalities, right?
Yep.
Yes, and before we exit, where can you be reached?
Look, man, y'all can follow me on social media, Eugene_Johnson. I'm at Southern University in Baton Rouge, so you can always email me for some more information, Eugene.Johnson at sus.edu. So that's how you can get to me, man, Eugene.Johnson at sus.edu, or follow me on social media, Eugene Johnson _, and that's on all socials, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, whatever.
That's absolutely fantastic. And that's Dr. Johnson. It's always great having you, Professor of Political Science at Southern University in Baton Rouge. And you also about to have, next time you come on the program, you will have another degree to your
my fourth degree
in what?
Mass communication with focus in public interest communications.
From where?
The University of Florida.
Absolutely fantastic. Again, this is Dr. Clark's Living Classroom. You can follow me on all platforms of social media. And as always, it's been a pleasure.